Andy Burnham looks set to become our next Prime Minister just 3 weeks after conceding on this very programme that he wanted the top job. Keir Starmer has announced his resignation after admitting he'd lost the support of his MPs. We've come to Kettering in Northamptonshire to get a first look at what people here think about having their 7th Prime Minister in a decade. As always, our audience reflects the general political picture across the nation. Welcome to Question Time from Kettering. On tonight's panel, the Labour chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Emily Thornberry, she says it's been an upsetting week, but that it was a question of when, not if, Keir Starmer stepped down. She wants a new Prime Minister to be brave and bold. Kevin Hollinrake is the Conservative Party chairman. He says Tory MPs will vote with Andy Burnham if he cuts welfare to boost defence spending, but that they'll call for a snap election if he doesn't. Zia Yusuf is Reform UK's Home Affairs spokesperson. He says the old two-party system is under pressure like never before, and that Andy Burnham is nothing more than Keir Starmer in jeans. And Stephanie Flanders is head of economics and government at the financial data and news company Bloomberg. She thinks Andy Burnham could revitalise Downing Street, but he doesn't have much room for manoeuvre with the nation's finances. Good evening. Welcome to our special question time after what has been an extraordinary week in politics. Welcome to our panel. Welcome to our audience here in Kettering. Thank you very much for coming here at the last moment. And of course, welcome to you as home as well. I am sure there's plenty of debate on social media. There always is with this programme. Feel free to get stuck in if you want to, or just sit back and watch the programme. Right, let's get started with our first question, which is from Peter Kingham.
Good evening. Andy Burnham is certainly not the Messiah. But is he the saviour of the Labour Party and even our country?
And Peter, since you asked this question, and I'm sure you're not alone in asking that question, what's your view?
I think we do need someone that's coming in that's going to bring a hope to our nation. He's going to give us a vision, going to give us direction. I suppose the jury is out whether Andy Burnham is that man. But let's hope so, because our country needs hope. Right.
Well, look, this is the first chance we have to see what an audience like you, you're politically representative of England, think of what's happened this week and think of Andy Burnham as the next Prime Minister. So let's hear from as many of you as I can. Right, we've got some people here with their hands up. Yes, man in the dark blue T-shirt.
No, I don't think he is what we need for the country. I think his 24,000 majority isn't a representative of the UK. I think 2 years ago Labour were practicing, I think you need to practice what you preach. 2 years ago you were saying that you can't have unelected representatives being Prime Minister, and now you're doing exactly the same. I think we just need a general election to actually see what we all need and want.
Okay. Woman there in the pink dress, yes.
So we've all spoken of Andy being the Messiah or not, but he has gotten to the position he has gotten to because his track record speaks for him. And I think we can all agree that a decade is a very long time for us to notice the transitions and give him at least space to do what he can. Because if we pile on him and pressure him, exactly what happened with Keir and what has been happening since 2016, and I think Brexit was the beginning of this transition, it will be the same thing. We need to trust that he can at least do what he says, and then if within a reasonable time he can't, then we can make a decision. But if we pressure him, want him to be the Messiah that he clearly isn't, we won't get anywhere.
Okay. Man at the very back.
We're about to say goodbye to a Labour Prime Minister who was elected on almost no policy. I don't think anyone here really knows what Andy Burnham stands for. Why do Labour MPs think it's going to be any different this time round?
A man here in the check shirt.
Yeah, I feel that we may be replacing like with like. I don't see anything about Andy Burnham that's really that much different from Keir Starmer. And I think that the country needs to go to an election to choose a new leader.
Okay. And there's a woman at the very back with her hand up. Yes.
I feel very hopeful.
You feel very hopeful?
I feel very hopeful, but I also felt very hopeful 2 years ago. I feel disappointed for Keir Starmer. I was excited that there would be a difference, and it's disappointing.
Right. And are you hopeful with Andy Burnham?
I am. I did vote for him in 2015. I am hopeful that...
Okay. So, Emily, I mean, that's just a handful of the people that put their hands up just now. I mean, in a certain sense, the impression I get is people don't really know who Andy Burnham is or what he stands for.
I mean, I think it's right to say he's somebody he's been involved in politics all his life, basically. He's been involved in politics in Westminster. He's held very high office in cabinets, Labour cabinets, and then has been up in Manchester, and Manchester has been a great success. And the Labour Party found itself with a leader who was on minus 33 in the polls. Very unpopular. And we knew that we couldn't really...
Why do you think that was? If you were going to put it in a nutshell, why do you think that was?
I think in a nutshell, I think that Keir is a very decent man, but he's not political. I know this is very, this is not very fashionable these days, because everybody who's political tries to pretend they're not political. But actually, there is a skill to being involved in politics. And I think that if you look at a comparison perhaps between Andy Burnham and Keir, Keir had another career, came into politics quite late, and did things in a particular way that wasn't terribly political. Whereas Andy Burnham is immersed in politics, immersed in Labour values. I think that when you're electing a Labour government, you elect a Labour government to be making decisions, to say, right, we've got this problem, let's find the best way through it, but let's allow Labour principles to guide us when it is that we make that decision. Otherwise, why are people voting Labour? And I think that it's much clearer with Andy Burnham where his politics come from, because he is deeply immersed in the Labour Party. So I think that...
We don't actually know what he's going to do on anything.
Well, I mean, he's going to speak on Monday about the economy. He's going to do a series of speeches in the next few weeks, setting out. But I think in the end, what's important is that he said that he's going to stick by the commitments we made in the manifesto, which is, quite a substantial document. But we've delivered some of it, but frankly, we could go further, we could go faster, we could do more than.
Okay.
And I think that's the thing. And he's also said that he'll stick to the fiscal rules. So I think that in a way, what matters, and I agree with this principle, which is it doesn't really matter who the leader is. What matters is what they're going to do. And he said, I'm going to deliver on the Labour manifesto. I'm going to stick within the rules, but look at the way in which I've been able to help transform Manchester. I do know how to get things done. I do understand about politics. I do understand about hope. I understand about explaining what I'm doing and why, what the plan is, and bringing people with me. And that, I think, are important skills for us to be able to bring the public with us, and in order to be able to keep the hope that the lady in the second row was talking about alive, so that we can say, this is what we're doing and this is why we're doing it.
Kevin.
Well, I would say, Emily, please don't go further and please don't go faster. Things are bad enough already. It's. I think the trouble, Peter, Andy Burnham is a far more personable person than Keir Starmer, and that's to his credit. The trouble is, the job of a mayor is completely different from the job of a prime minister. A job of a mayor is to bang the table for more money and spend that money, central government money, in Manchester. That's what he's done, and he's done that reasonably successfully. The job of a prime minister is to take really difficult decisions, and I think that's where Keir Starmer's come unstuck, because he's taken some difficult decisions, then backtracked on them as U-turned like 20 times. So, and the job we've got to do now, we've got to cut the cost of doing government, because there's some really urgent priorities we need, not least properly fund our defence, the defence of the realm. That's what we've got to do. There's a £28 billion hole in those finances. So we've got to cut the costs of doing government welfare and cut the size of government. That's what we've got to do. There's about 50 billion we found there to be able to do that. And then you can fund defence. And crucially, you can cut taxes as well, because that's then going to help stimulate the economy, get the economy growing, creating jobs and helping people build their businesses. All those things need to happen, but they are very, very tough choices. And the only person I've heard talking about those tough choices and being realistic about them is Kemi Badenoch. Nobody else has found anywhere near those kind of savings that we need to save to fund defence and cut taxes.
And these calls that I'm hearing from Conservatives for a snap election, surely you're not serious about that. I mean, Reform are well ahead of you and have been for some time. There's no indication that you would win.
Listen, everybody enters politics, whatever political colour you wear, because you want to do the best by the country. And there are some urgent priorities for this country, not least defending the realm. You know, the
No, I
reality
get that, but these calls for a snappish election, I mean, surely you're saying it because you feel you have to, but you don't really mean it.
No, I mean, Kemi's been very clear that if Andy Burnham works with us on welfare reform and other reforms to fund defence, then we will help him to do that. We'll give him 117 votes to let him get that legislation through, because Keir Starmer couldn't do, and he tried to get welfare reform through the Labour backbenchers, so we'll help him do it.
In the end, Kevin's doing his job. You know, the opposition will ask for a general election. I asked for a general election. Whenever there was a change of Prime Minister, I used to call for a. But, you know, in the end, when people vote, they don't vote for a president, they vote for a particular MP and their party. And then it's up to those MPs to decide who their leader is. We don't have a presidential system.
Okay, well, let's see
Just
what
like
our
you
audience
didn't
makes
have
of
a
it.
general election as a result of it. I think it's more likely that you ought to have by-elections whenever people jump ship from one political party to another. Because if people voted Conservative and end up with a Reform MP, they ought to be allowed to have a by-election.
Yes, but when people defected from the Conservatives to Labour, I don't remember Labour say, let's have a by-election. So, yes. Yes.
Just coming back to you, Emily, with regards to you said who doesn't so much matter who's in charge, but what they are doing. Now, we know it's very likely going to be Andy Burnham, and we know he's pro-Europe. Now, from my personal perspective, what is the Labour Party going to do with regards to either having better relationships with Europe or for the European citizens like myself, being Belgian, to ease bureaucracy within this country?
Yeah. All right, let's see. I'm going to go around the panel, if you forgive me. There's someone right at the very back in the blue top. Yes.
Should it matter whether or not you're popular when you're in government? And historically...
Sorry, you say, does it matter?
Does it matter? Because historically, successful prime ministers have experienced ebbs and flows in their government. And I'm concerned that we're so driven towards what's popular that we're not thinking about the policy that Emily is concerned about and the impacts on our day-to-day lives.
Stephanie, so is Andy Burnham the Save the Labour Party and even the country? I mean, is there a sense that people are projecting onto him, you know, those who support him, perhaps what they hope he'll deliver? Because he has said very little.
Yeah,
so far.
I mean, that is the honest answer to your question. We don't know. I also think when it comes to being a saviour of the Labour Party, that's probably a big chunk of the population doesn't care whether he's a saviour of the Labour Party. They care whether he will be a better Prime Minister and better able to push through an agenda that bears some relation to the manifesto that Labour was elected on. So I think that's the sort of key thing. And I think we do tend to, in all these debates, there's been so much focus about, well, obviously it should be changed because we've got to rescue the Labour Party or we've got to rescue this government. And people have rightly looked from the outside saying, no, we just want the policy to be better. And I think whether
how much room for manoeuvre do you think?
Well, I think if you're
Burnham
looking
has?
from an investor standpoint, from a sort of broader economic standpoint, what even people in the markets are looking for is someone who has a real purpose, a sense of purpose that they can explain to people and sell to his party. I think that was why we've seen a change, is not necessarily just because Keir Starmer was unpopular, but because he was unpopular in his party and couldn't persuade people to come along with him. And then actually is able to follow through with courage on getting that purpose fulfilled and his missions fulfilled. And that also involves being able to kind of pull on the levers of power more effectively than this Prime Minister has done. And if you can do that and actually, you know, the investors can tell the difference between something that they're told is a difficult decision and something that is actually difficult, like cutting welfare significantly in a way that actually causes you to be unpopular in a certain chunk of the population, then I think he could also be rewarded. You know, there is an upside to persuading people that you have more conviction, where you actually are going to be paying less in debt interest, which would be could be tens of billions of pounds over the next few years.
And does he have much room to manoeuvre financially? I mean, if he's going to stick to the fiscal rules, he's going to stick to the manifesto, how much can he do differently?
Well, any savings from the welfare budget, obviously, would be, if he made difficult decisions and maybe even made the difficult decision of going with the Conservatives on a reform, I think that is going to be serious money because we have a £350 billion welfare budget. But there is room within the existing rules, and Rachel Reeves has already used some of it, to have more investment. And particularly on things that he's talked about, on infrastructure, on housing. There are ways that he can do that. But he will have to do it in a way that people in the markets respect and can see it's going to be well spent.
Zia.
I just can't believe we're back here again. I can't believe we're back in a place. The Tories gave us 5 prime ministers in 6 years. This is, again, a situation where we have a career politician who's not had a proper job in his entire life, foisted on the people of Britain as prime minister without them having any say on it. 0.03% of the British public have voted for Andy Burnham. And the first question today was from Peter, who asked, does this man have a vision? I mean, I'd love to know, how many of you, put your hands up if you can see a vision that Andy Burnham has for the country. Okay, so here's what we know about Andy Burnham for sure. He has already become the king of U-turn, and he hasn't even become prime minister yet. In the last couple of years, he's taken the following positions. He said that we should allow biological men to go into women's changing rooms, but also that we shouldn't. He said that illegal migrants should immediately get lifetime access to welfare, but also that they shouldn't. He said that we should rejoin the European Union, but also that we shouldn't. This is a man who has no principles. He is an empty vessel. And here's the really important point. Whatever your politics are, I think one of the reasons we've had this endless conga line of clownish prime ministers in this country that have been unable to govern for the British people is because you need a mandate. Now, you've seen all of this nonsense, Shabana Mahmood and Mike Tapp tweet warring against each other. Not a single Labour minister right now is focused on what matters, which is governing for the British people. If Andy Burnham was a decent man, and maybe he is, then he would put his case to the British people, draft a manifesto and call a general election.
Man here.
I think that, the big question I have for you, especially Emily, is that, if you're saying that you don't mind who the person is, but you mind if they deliver the policy for the people, absolutely fine. But why not any one of the X amount of Labour MPs? Why are they all so scared of running in a leadership election against somebody who was parachuted in last minute to essentially lead the country? Why is everybody so scared of running against Andy Burnham? Why not actually let him say what he believes in and let the Labour Party members have a proper contest?
Okay, I'll come to it. Man here in the front.
It's all well and good. I think Mr Starmer wasn't very popular because first past the post meant that he didn't have a very large majority of the vote. Less than a third of the country gave him a super majority. And I don't think Mr Burnham, when he comes down, is going to be able to do things very much differently because they're all beholden to the donors that are chucking money at them. So, I'm despair every time I hear the panel talk about attacking the welfare again. Leave the poor, disabled and the sick and the ill alone.
Because you say this is not about people who are in need, those kind of people who are disabled and sick. It's people with low-level mental health conditions that would be better at work. People with low-level anxiety or depression. These kind of people, we've seen a huge spike in this since COVID. We've got to get those people back to work.
Kevin,
that's good for them and good for the economy.
How many of those are there? And by taking them off the welfare bill, how much money would be saved?
We're saving £23 billion. That's what it would save.
Low-level anxiety.
Low-level anxiety and mental health conditions. People are not having face-to-face assessments.
But hang on, so just to be clear, you're saying that people with low-level anxiety, and I'm not doubting it, I'm just wondering how you know this, because last time I asked the Conservative minister, they did said it wasn't possible to find out. But you're saying that people with low-level anxiety cost $23 billion a year.
There's a number of different people in that cohort, but that's an example of some of the people in that cohort. And if you changed
because the fact is you don't know how much would be saved by taking
it's £23 billion. I mean, I don't know specifically about low-level anxiety.
That's the case you're citing, so that's why I'm asking.
Of the people in that cohort that are costing the taxpayer that money. Those people would be better at work.
So who else needs to come off to save that $23 billion?
Things like people with ADHD, for example, or low-level depression or anxiety. These people are better at work. That doesn't mean these people don't get support. Of course, these people want support, but that's not the same as cash payments. That's what's wrong. That's what we want to change. Can I just say, Zia, one thing that never ceases to amaze me is you talk about government, how easy it is to run government. Yet you've never stood for Parliament. Andy Burnham, to be fair to him, and you criticise many of the things he's done and said, but at least he's been willing to put his head above the parapet. Why have you not done that? Why have you not stood in some of the by-elections, the opportunities you've had around the country to get elected?
So it's interesting that you think all of the country's problems seem to be down to whether I've stood in a by-election or not.
No,
What makes you hold on.
Is.
What makes you think I never put myself above the parapet and wanted to stand in a by-election, Kev?
Well, you haven't done that, have you?
What makes you think that?
Because you haven't stood, Zia.
So hold on. So anybody who wants to stand in a by-election automatically gets to do so. Maybe in the Conservative Party, where it's just cronyism and nothing else matters, mate. But I think you made a lot of very big assumptions.
Okay, so that's interesting. So have you put your name forward to stand in by-elections?
We have an application process to stand in parliamentary by-elections, and all I'd say is that coming after me for not being willing to stand in a parliamentary by-election is incorrect and hugely presumptuous.
What did they do? Why did they stop?
Did they refuse you?
So again, what we did not do is get an MP who was duly elected by a constituency in 2024 to stand down for the sole purpose of unseating the current Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. That's what we did not do. And I want to remind everybody again, you're going to keep hearing cheap political points made by what we call the Uni Party. The Tories and Labour have governed this country now for about 100 years. And how do you feel about the job that they have done? And every time they try to make out that somehow all of the problems, whether it's the quality of the roads, whether it's the fiscal situation. I mean, we're closing on £3 trillion of national debt, tripled by, of course, the party of fiscal responsibility, the Conservative Party. None of that has anything to do with reform. But if you hear the Tories and Labour talk about it, it's everything to do with us. Here's the really fundamental and important point I want to make again. We currently have, as far as I'm concerned, an illegitimate Prime Minister. Sure, I've not stood for election. I have absolutely zero influence about legislation in this country and important decisions that impact the people in this audience's lives and people watching these program's lives at home. And they are struggling in probably the biggest cost of living crisis in at least 15 years, struggling with the fact that they're melting in many places in this country under a heat wave, and yet air conditioning is a factor illegal.
At the risk of going into a long
they are
list.
buckling under the pressure of a border policy that makes absolutely no sense whatsoever.
Right.
So what I'm saying is, I'm going to say again, what Andy Burnham should do is write a manifesto, put it in front of the British people, and see whether they want him to be Prime Minister.
Okay. I'm going to move on, but just to be clear, because this is new information, what you're telling us tonight, Zia, is that you have requested to stand in a by-election, but you haven't been selected.
What I'm telling you is the presumption that I have not put myself forward is a presumption, and yeah, it's inaccurate.
But that wasn't my point.
So therefore you have.
It was absolutely
No, so hang on, Kevin. So therefore you have put your name forward.
Your point, that fundamental was exactly your point.
Kevin, let's get a clear answer.
No, you see, at Reform, we actually have a process. We have a process.
They wouldn't let you be their
We have a process. You see, again, what we're not. No, hold on. We actually have a proper process by which you apply. What we don't have is an NEC. What we don't have is an NEC that, remember, Keir Starmer blocked Andy Burnham the first time, and then pushed him through to conduct a coup d'etat on your current leader. And it's a really important point again here. This is the same person sat to my left who attacked the Tory party, correctly actually,
all right,
for endless carousel of unelected prime
so you've made that point.
Now we're seeing
you've made the point
again.
about the carousel. I'm going to move on, but I am taking from what you've said, because it is new information, and I think it's worth noting, that you have put your name forward to stand in by-elections, but you've not been selected. If I'm wrong, tell me now.
There we go.
Okay, so I'm going to move on. Let's take another question now, it's all related though. Thomas Dearman, where are you?
Since Brexit, Britain is about to get our 7th Prime Minister in 10 years. Is Britain becoming ungovernable?
Now, we had a lot of questions based around this exact point. Are we ungovernable, whatever that means? Stephanie?
I think we have had a series. I think it's somewhat letting off the hook Keir Starmer and others who've not been good prime ministers in office to just say, oh, they were just unlucky to be in a system that had become ungovernable, that had become broken. I think in their different ways, turned out to be the wrong person to deal with the particular challenge they face at that time. But I do think that Brexit, combination of Brexit and the sort of hyper-politicization that we have from social media, where people can feel quickly and very violently about things that are political, but are not part of kind of broader institutions that actually might turn that into a constructive agenda for doing things. They can just feel violently about things online or maybe go on a demonstration and then they go back home and they haven't actually achieved any political change and they might change their mind the next week. So I think in that kind of environment, it becomes very hard to do policy. And I think it's been particularly hard to do policy in the wake of Brexit, where you had, in effect, the result was a massive kick in the teeth to a whole lot of experts and the sort of policy-making apparatus, the policy-making elite, if you like. They all got a good kicking, but as a result, they had a total loss of confidence. And a lot of the people who would have otherwise been of sort of helping and guiding and using their expertise in government to help ministers were questioning themselves, saying, well, we told them what was the right thing last time and they didn't do that, so what do we do now? I think there was this sort of crisis of confidence that just sort of seeped through the British establishment. And many people might say that was a good thing, that they'd sort of been punished for some of the things in the past. But I think it has made, and Brexit was sort of a part of that, that it was impossible to give people what they'd voted for because, as we all know, everyone voted for different things. And it sort of scrambled the machinery of government in a way that would have made it difficult for anybody, but it was particularly difficult for these flawed characters.
Okay, man there in the black and white shirt, yes.
I think it's rich for Zia Yusuf to say that we've had 5 prime ministers in the last 10 years since Brexit, when it's your leader, Nigel Farage, who was the architect of Brexit, which has led to the situation we're now in, where we're now ungovernable.
Andy, I will. And you think Brexit has made us ungovernable? Why?
I think it's made us ungovernable because we don't have any stability anymore. We're not in Europe anymore. We've got war on the continent. If anything, now we should be in Europe. It's so important. And recent studies have shown that we have between 4 and 8% loss of our economic growth because we're not in the European Union. I mean, it would just be so much easier. So it doesn't make any sense. We need to get back in.
Okay, Zia, I'm sure that's not your view.
I find it extraordinary that, again, it's the same Labour and Tory politicians concerned about whether this country is now, quote, ungovernable. What they're trying to do is place the blame for their own catastrophic betrayal of their own voters on the voters themselves. Look, the Tories were voted in time and time and time again, whether people in this audience agree or not, because the British public wanted less immigration. The Tories promised in 4 consecutive manifestos to cut net immigration down to the tens of thousands. What did they do? They shipped in 12 million people inside 14 years. Now Labour get in, and what are the things that took Keir Starmer down to sub-zero levels in the polls? It was cutting the winter fuel allowance. Was that in the manifesto? No, it wasn't. It was the attack on farmers in terms of inheritance tax that drove a farmer to suicide. Was that in the manifesto? No, it was not. It was digital ID. It's an endless carrot. It was the national insurance contribution increase for employers. All Labour have done, what all Keir Starmer did after winning, promising to change things, has delivered us an endless carousel, endless conga line of sleaze, whether it's Mandelson or anything else, whether it's Lord Alley and the glasses, etc. And what we have seen time and time again, I'm afraid, over the last 2 decades, is Labour and Tory politicians promise the electorate one thing and do literally the opposite of the thing that they promised. And to blame that on the voters, and say, oh, it's because Britain is ungovernable, I think is the most appalling deflection of responsibility, and that's a lot of why reform exists and why reform have led in closing on 300 national opinion polls in a row, because people are sick and tired of it.
Okay, so there are certainly things that are making it much more difficult to govern Britain. There are things happening which are dividing us. Social media being one of them, and the way in which social media will push out outrage and division as a result. But there's also been a series of things. Brexit certainly is one of the things, but that should have been sort of a once-in-a-lifetime kind of thing happen. But what else did we have? We had COVID. We had Ukraine, a war on European soil. We had the Iranian war and all the effects that's had on our ability to be able to import things. We're still getting over the global financial collapse, and we've had Trump. And so we've had all of these things together, which has been really challenging, I think, for our country. But I do think that we haven't fundamentally changed and that we do have some hope. And I know Reform are upset about this, but 6 weeks ago in Makersfield, there were 8 out of 8 of the wards went Reform. And yet, because of a 23% swing to Labour, Andy Burnham was elected.
Because they wanted to kick Starmer out. Because Burnham was the kick Starmer out candidate. The people of Makerfield voted for reform in the local elections because they wanted to get Starmer out. And they voted. I'm sorry. The reason why they voted for reform is because they wanted to get the Labour leader out of office.
Could you stop so that I can finish what I'm saying? I don't believe that our country has fundamentally changed. I do believe that our country is one where essentially we want to be able to look after one another. We want to be able to earn enough money to be able to feed our families, and we want our children to do better than we did. We want to be safe and we want to be secure and we want to have some hope. And we want there to be a plan. And that is that is why I think that if Andy Burnham does become the next Prime Minister, that is his challenge. And his other challenge is to make sure that we do not get the populist right elected into our country and running it because they will ruin us.
Woman there with the glasses. Yes, she's got a microphone over your head there. Yes, you. I'm looking at you. You had your hand up. There you go.
Yeah, I don't think the problem is that this country has become ungovernable. But what I do think is that the political arena, if you like, has changed a lot, and the electorate have become a lot more impatient and far less likely to let things carry on as they are for whatever reason. In the same way that football managers, the England football manager changes every 5 minutes. Therefore, in the same way, the Prime Minister needs to change every 5 minutes. The Prime Minister, whatever party they are leading, whichever party they stand for, needs to be given time, adequate time, to actually carry out their policies and their manifesto.
Okay. And the person in the black or dark blue T-shirt, I think, just behind. No, to the right. To the right. You've got your hand up. You've got short, dark brown hair. That's it. There you go.
Hi. So I've worked in education for 17 years, and I just wanted to refer back to Brexit. So my partner, for example, has a master's in adolescence child mental health. She's got a BA degree in English. Yet, due to Brexit, she's from Greece. She can't get a job anywhere because nobody will sponsor visas. I've worked in education now. I'm a recruiter. We are desperate for maths and English teachers. And there's no schools in Northamptonshire, very, very limited, that are offering opportunity for sponsorship. And how are we preparing for our young people, our future leaders? Why are we doing this? Why are we causing division? We're stronger, more united. We're stronger when we collectively work together. And I just feel like we are more divided than ever. And we have to start to really think about these people. They're people you're talking about, not immigrants, they're people. And they're people that help
us. Is Britain becoming young? Yes, okay. I'm exactly coming to you.
No, I don't think it is, Thomas. I don't think it's ungovernable as long as our politicians are willing to make the tough choices. And I set some out earlier. Not everybody will agree with them, but that's the kind of choices we've got to make to be able to balance the books and prioritise spending. And I think that's where Keir Starmer went wrong. He wasn't able either to take the tough decisions or force those decisions past his backbenchers. And I think Andy Burnham will have exactly the same problem. But the point I just want to make, which is coming back to Zia, the point really, I don't care if you stand for election or not. The point is, you sit there having not stood for election and say it's all so easy. That's my point about it. And clearly it must be Nigel Farage is preventing you from standing, because a one-man band, and he's the only person who dictates which candidates go forward. But also Nigel Farage. You talked about Andy Burnham. So Nigel Farage said he was going to nationalise the water industry, and then he said he wasn't. He said he was going to do £90 billion of tax cuts at the last election, and then he said he wasn't. He said he was going to get the Royal Navy to tow the boats back, small boats back to northern France, and then he said he wasn't. And he said he was going to he was going to lift the cap on two-child benefits, and then he said he wasn't. So when you sit there and say how it's all easy from having never run for Parliament and never put your head above the parapet, I think people should realistically question your ability to deliver on what you say you're going to do, because you just don't know anything about it.
Zia, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, well, firstly, I genuinely really appreciate Kevin's endorsement. Clearly, the country's problems would be solved immediately if I ran for Parliament. This is a really important point. Let's not forget what the Tories did in their 14 years of government. We've heard a lot. Pretty much every substantive answer he's given today has talked about living within our means and making sure that we're spending money in a fiscally responsible way. This is supposed to be the party of low taxes. This is the party that tripled our national debt to close to £3 trillion. This is the party that squandered. We heard about COVID. This is the party that squandered £5 billion to fraud, including £200 million. Remember Baroness Moan? Do you remember Baroness Moan and the money that turned up in the offshore trust? All of those Tory mates who got PPE money for companies that had existed for about 2 minutes. This is the party that imported 12 million people inside 14 years, allowed wokery to run rampant through all of our great institutions. That is why most of your colleagues lost their seats at the last general election, and most of your colleaague are going to lose their seats.
Okay, hang on.
Why the debt increased. The debt increased because of the financial crisis in 2010. We inherited a country that was bankrupt. All the money we put in
through... What was the national debt in 2010?
Okay. All right, tell you what, I'm going to stop you here. I'm going to stop you here, because this next question is going to be pretty interesting in the context of this. Pete Flower, where are you sitting? All right, off you go.
If the Conservatives and Reform UK continue to compete rather than cooperating, how can the political right realistically challenge Labour at the next general election?
So would you like to see the Conservatives and Reform collaborate?
I think they have to.
Do you think we're seeing any signs of that?
No. No, and this is the problem, I think. I think the left are quite happy to coalesce. And obviously with the defections from Conservative to Reform and the split between Nigel Farage and Rupert Lowe, there seems to be a lot of animosity on that side.
Okay, I'm obviously going to come to you, Per. Stephanie, why don't you kick us off on this?
I mean, I'm struck by the fact that although we kind of feel like we live in a world where Reform are just waiting to take power, and this is all just a sort of preamble to Reform winning the next election, and everything that the government is doing, everything that's happened with Labour is all seen through that prism. It's striking to me that of the 5 by-elections since 2024, Reform's only won one of them by my count. So I think this, your question actually gets to the point of this kind of assumption that Reform is just going to walk into Downing Street in the next election, which some people use for sort of scare tactics. I suspect will have a slightly different tone from Andy Burnham. I think,
and obviously Reform have led in the polls for a long time now.
But I just think it sort of shows we have a system that is not equipped for 5 parties with this kind of level of support. Maybe that's one of the things, we have since Brexit become more European. We're growing more slowly and we have a lot more parties and we find it very hard to form governments. But I do think without the kind of discussion that you're talking about, which doesn't seem very likely here, that may be one of the reasons why people are talking about Andy Burnham calling an election, because actually when it comes down to it, it would be hard for Reform to win or the right to win.
Can I just hear from some of you about this particular point then, whether you think it's a good or a bad idea to get this kind of coalescence of ideas around the right? Yes, the man there in the colourful shirt.
I think that as an older man, I have a view, and that is that many of us in this country are completely and utterly disenchanted with the flipping lot of you. You are... And when the Conservative member talks about how the Labour Party are going to bring in a mayor from Manchester, look what happened when you brought in a mayor. How disingenuous. I mean, I just think that if we could find some way in which people's votes counted, then people would vote more. And the way it looks at the moment is, yes, perhaps there is going to be somebody who wasn't voted in, but the Conservatives know all about that, so I don't know how they dare say anything. The way things are at the moment, to get reform in with Nigel Farage, who is the biggest opportunist in this country politically, because people are fed up with a lot of you and want something different. And if that difference comes by getting rid of first past the post and having collaborative government, then that might be a way forward.
Okay. The woman in the white top with the glasses.
I think that the gentleman, the Conservative gentleman, I'm sorry, I've forgotten your name.
Kevin Hollinrake.
Yeah, sorry. The idea that Zia Yusuf and his party and you two together is basically my nightmare. I just, but you both just, not too far to the right. I'm definitely a fan of Labour, and I wish that Andy Burnham makes a good job of it.
Well, listen, I'd be really, and obviously Zia and Kevin, I'm going to come to you, of course I am, but are there where are the reform supporters? Let's hear your view on this. Yes, there's two of you there. So let's the man in the white shirt a little bit further forward. Yes.
Yeah. One thing I've noticed that obviously with reform, but I'm looking at Labour and I'm looking at Conservative, and through 2 or 3 times I've noticed that when there was quite a, you was having a discussion about 23 million and ADHD, etc., then you just spun it and just aimed your anger at reform, and you seem to be doing the same, and that is what the British public is fed up with. We're taxpayers, and all we hear you do is tit for tat and arguing, and you don't actually important things that you should be doing. You're not doing it. I've just sat here 3 times and watched it, and you've sort of gone for Yusuf, but shouldn't you be sort of discussing more important things?
All right. The man behind you in the black t-shirt, or the man in the another man in the white shirt. Oh, both of you. Do you?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll hear from both. The man in the black top first.
Right. I did vote reform, but I'm moving to restore, mainly because I'm sick of the lot of them, and the restore would be a protest vote. Every MP, as far as I can see, just taking us, and Nigel Farage is definitely that. They're not working for us.
But you did support him. You're now disenchanted. That's what you're saying, I think.
Yeah, Rupert.
Okay.
Sorry, I'll get nervous. Nigel Farage turns up with a pint and a smile. Rupert Lowe turns up with a book with the facts.
All right.
And that's what I want to hear.
The man next to you.
To answer the question to the gentleman about would it be good to have 2 right-wing parties joined together, so we'd have Farage, Prime Minister, we'd have Tommy Robinson as the Chancellor Exchequer, because at the end of the day, it is pathetic what's going on with Farage at the moment. People should not even contemplate ever having him as in charge of the country.
Okay, all right, but I know there are plenty of people here in this audience who do support Nigel Farage. I'm just wondering if any of you support this idea of a kind of coalition on the right.
I actually just checked that, though, because you did ask earlier who supports reform, and I make out 4 people in the audience put their hands up, which is interesting given reform is at 28% in the average of the poll. So, genuine question, could we get a show of hands from people who actually support reform?
I think you'll see that's a bit more than 4.
I make that 8. Yeah, it's certainly not. It's certainly nowhere close to representative again, I'm afraid, Fiona.
Can I just point out, there are more people than that in the audience, they're just not putting their hands up.
Okay, we'll all have to take the BBC.
And there's nothing I can do about that, I'm afraid, because as you know, we are... let me finish. We are scrupulous about making sure that our audience is politically representative, and I just want to
And we all
point
just
that
have to take the BBC's word for that. Fair enough. Okay.
Well, I'm certainly not lying about it, I can tell you that.
Well, then where's the evidence? So, Fiona, with respect, where's the evidence for that? So you just made an important claim, but you had appealed to authority, which is the BBC should believe us. So where's the evidence for it?
As you know, we question everybody, we interview everybody over the phone, we check their social media, but what also happens is not everyone wants to put their hand up and show their political allegiance on national television. Okay. And there's nothing I can do about that, I'm afraid.
Which is why I just said you've got to take the BBC word for it, which you agree with.
And I'm happy to do so. But listen, the question from Peter is, if the Conservatives and Reform UK continue competing rather than cooperating, how can the political right realistically challenge Labour at the next general election? What's your feeling about that?
I would just point to the data. So in Caerphilly, the Conservatives lost their deposit, were irrelevant and non-entity. In Gorton and Denton, they lost a deposit, were irrelevant and a non-entity. In Makerfield, they lost a deposit and were a non-entity. So I could go on. The data does not back up this notion that the Tories and Labour, the Tories and Reform together would be a superior electoral force. And I also make the point too that one of the core reasons Reform exists is out of this sheer sense of betrayal for what those same said Tories did to the country. What they claim to say, what they claim to stand for, is not only what they'll do in government, it is the very opposite of what they do in government. And that is why, if you want secure borders, if you want the mass deportation of illegal migrants, you want your taxes to come down, you want a sensible energy policy that doesn't worship Greta Thunberg at the expense of the well-being of the British people, then you've got to vote for Reform, and we need a Reform majority.
So, Kevin, you lost your deposit in Makerfield. Kemi Badenoch's own personality, popularity ratings are not bad, but for the Conservative Party overall, they're terrible. Without some kind of alliance, is there not the possibility of annihilation for you the next
No, I don't agree with that. As Aberdeen South showed last week, when we got 50% of the vote, Reform won nothing last week. We won one local parliamentary by-election, and I think we won 4 local by-elections that week. Reform won nothing. Of course, it's different in different parts of the country in terms of the demographic and the propensity to vote a certain way. So I don't believe that. And the Conservative Party, our vote share, if you look at the local elections, last year, Reform were the winners on the night, by 14 points, this year by 7 points. We've halved that gap. But I want to take the points that were put to me in terms of Peter, but also this gentleman there. Can I just say, and I hear what you are saying. I have said, actually, this evening, what the constructive things we would do to cut the cost of doing government to fund defence. It's not just been a case of attacking Zia, but it is important that you hear why this is just nonsense. It's a populist party. And that's my point to you, sir, as well, Peter. It is not a Conservative Party and an alternative Conservative Party. We're a Conservative Party. They're populists. All the stuff they talk, it's just not deliverable. I listed those things that Nigel Farage had promised, the tax cuts, the nationalisation, the lifting of welfare, all of which he's backtracked on, because he just plucks these things out of thin air. That is not a Conservative Party. We make our mistakes. We've made our mistakes in government. I'll hold my hands up to them. And some of the things that Zia says are right. We've made mistakes on certain things. But it was never a failure of intention. It was a failure of execution. I think now we have a leader in the Conservative Party under Kemi Badenoch who will do the proper work to make sure those plans are workable and deliverable. And she's got the strength and the courage and the willing to take the tough decisions in government. So I don't think we need to do anything with any other party. I think we can win an outright victory whenever that election comes, because Kemi is by far the most popular politician in this country, leader, and people have not yet had the chance to vote for Kemi. I think when they do, they'll make the right decision, and I think we can form a majority.
Emily?
I think that actually Reform has kind of reached a peak. I think that they just don't seem to be able to. They're on 23%, I think, on a good day, but they're finding it really difficult to get through that. I think they are eating up people who voted Conservative in the past and who are angry, and there's a movement on the right. I mean, I do get that, but I also think that people are beginning to see through them, and thank goodness. I mean, even the former chair, David Bull, has said that the Reform Party is far bigger than Nigel Farage, and that Nigel Farage needs to take a break. Can Nigel Farage continue to lead the Reform Party? Is it just him, or is it more than that? He's in an awful lot of difficulties. And I am concerned to make sure that we don't allow our country to be taken over by populists who are snake oil salesmen, who make promises that cannot be delivered, who make easy answers to difficult problems, who tell us that actually the answer is to scrap the Equality Act for mass deportations, that if you don't have a British passport and you end up in social housing with your girlfriend and their children, they may all be British, but they can all be chucked out of the country. I mean, this is what we're talking about. We need to stop and take a cold, hard look at these people, because they don't offer the answers that our country requires.
Let's see, we've got time just for one more question. I'm going to try and fit it in. From Jeffrey Trowbridge. Where are you? There you are.
Do recent high temperatures and extreme weather events highlight the absolute need to tackle climate change, particularly emissions from fossil fuels?
So look, it's pretty warm in here. And I don't need to tell you, we had the 3rd hottest day in June. on record. 37.3, I think it has been today. Kevin.
Yes, I mean, climate change is, of course, with us, and we need to deal with it, and we need to transition from the way we've been producing energy in the past in terms of fossil fuels and move to renewables and nuclear and different sources of energy, a mix of energy. But we've got to do it in a way that is deliverable and got to do it in a way that doesn't disadvantage our industries in the UK, particularly manufacturing industry, high energy intensive industries. We move too quickly, I think, at times in the past.
So you want to scrap the Climate Change Act?
We don't want to get there by 20. It's not possible to get there by 2050. So it would be a later point than that. But, you know, so I think we've got to be realistic about what we can afford. It costs money to make that transition. That's the reality. So we should be drilling in the North Sea. We are importing half of our gas. It makes no sense to import gas when we could produce it ourselves, for example. That's one of the effects of this government, particularly in terms of restricting our ability to produce oil and gas in the North Sea. We want to make sure, of course, we do transition in terms of wind energy and solar and nuclear as well, but still fossil fuels and power generation will be with us for many decades.
But in terms of net zero, you're saying we don't want to get there by 2050, but it's
just not possible in an
But what you
affordable
haven't
way.
come up with is any kind of alternative. At the moment, it's just in the kind of, well, no, in terms of a date.
I know we haven't got a date.
It's just kind of at some point in the future, we don't know when.
It's got to be affordable. It's not right that businesses can't compete with international competition. It's not right that we're paying more for our energy as consumers. You know, that's not.
Sure, I get that. But in terms of a date, you're just saying, we don't want to get there by 2050, but when we might get there, we've no idea. We'll just put that in a too difficult box.
This is the problem. This is where we went wrong before. We plucked a date out of thin air. That's what we did. It was a wrong thing to do. Kemi was against it at the time, and so she spoke against it. One of the few people that did. We've got to work out how we get to that transition, over what period, and make sure it's affordable.
Stephanie.
I think, I mean, in years past, when the argument was made, there was a big Stern review, there were various other things, made a basic argument that it was going to be less costly. It was going to cost something, but it was going to cost less to us as a society, as an economy, to move to net zero and to adjust to climate change in advance. That was going to be less costly than adjusting to it once it happened and on the fly and trying to get air conditioners inside schools. And I think that hasn't been real to people before now, and I think it has become very palpable. People who thought, well, nice to have a hotter summer, have realised actually there's huge downsides to that and huge costs to the government. So I think, you know, this week has definitely performed that service. But I also think, remember, we're talking about, even if you didn't have climate change, I think just looking at what has happened to the cost of energy in response to a very uncertain world, huge, not just climate changes, but also geopolitical shifts, Donald Trump. We've had wild shifts in the price of energy, and it's scarce energy, it's fossil fuel energy that provides that enormous variation. And so just as a matter of sort of long-term economics, moving to a source of energy that is inherently unlimited and has a marginal cost of zero is a more sensible proposition. The problem is getting there, and we all know it's been enormously costly, and because the government couldn't pay the bill, businesses and households have been paying the bill, and that is, as economists say, deeply suboptimal, but it is still, I think, we're seeing the case for it this week and in everything that's happening in the world.
And Emily, as far as Labour are concerned, there seems to be some movement about drilling in the North Sea. It was absolutely off the cards, whereas now there seems that maybe it's something that is not quite so out of the question after all.
Well, I think the manifesto commitment's a clear one, which is that we won't be giving any new licences for fossil fuel in the North Sea. So, I mean, that's, you know, where there is a licence already. There's been a couple of these, I think, Rosebank and Jackdaw, thank you, are in a state of flux at the moment. They've been subject to legal challenge and decisions that need to be made about those. And they need to be done in a way which is true to the manifesto, true to our future, and pragmatic. And it's a hard decision. And it's a hard decision because in the end, you know, we are the selfish generation. You know, I mean, our children will live in a completely different world unless we stop doing what we're doing, and we have an absolute obligation to do something about it. And we all know that in our bones. But where we have failed as politicians is to make it clear what the plan is. because we need to have a plan together.
Well, there was a bit of plan, and Ed Miliband said it was going to save us, was it £300 off our bills?
Yeah.
And that hasn't happened.
Well, actually, we're getting there, and this week we've been announcing.
Are we?
Well, you know, he may not have been the Messiah, and may not have realised that there would be 2 wars happening which has made life a little bit more difficult. But we have invested £100 billion in renewables. We are celebrating that this week. It does mean that we are driving, good jobs, high quality jobs, and investment into the UK, but we're also making sure that we can have our own energy supplies. We won't be answerable to Putin. It won't be so important about the Straits of Hormuz. We need to be able to look after ourselves, but most importantly, we need to make our contribution to fighting climate change. We don't have an alternative. We have to do it, and we have to be brave and bold, and we have to have a plan, and we have to stick to it and have some vision.
All right. So, Zia, let me bring you in, because obviously Reform, you want to scrap net zero targets, cancel renewable energy subsidies, drill in the North Sea, bring in fracking. So you take a diametrically opposed view.
Well, what we're in favour of is making sure that British people can afford their energy bills, and that British people don't freeze in the winter and melt in the summer. So on average, 5,500 British people die each winter as a result of the cold. And in 2022 alone, just over 4,500 British people tragically died as a result of the heat. And despite that, because of this cult of net zero, the Tories made air conditioning de facto illegal. Labour are doubling down on that. They are doubling down on that strategy. And here's a really important point. China, if you believe, so listen, is man-made climate change happening? In my view, probably yes. Really importantly, China is north of 30% of global carbon emissions. The UK is less than 1%. The UK could eliminate all of its carbon emissions today, and it's going to have virtually zero impact on the trajectory of global temperatures. But here's what we can do. We can make sure that British people do not die in the heat and do not die in the cold. And here's a really important point. If you want practical solutions that care about the British people, then you should vote for Reform. And by the way, if you really feel strongly about climate change, and I mean this sincerely, then I encourage you to take up every possible avenue you have to change the trajectory, for example, of Chinese energy policy. Britain, this is the last point I'll make on this, the Tories and Labour were so sure we didn't need our coal power plants, they blew them all up. Do you know how much coal China pulled out of the ground last year? 4.8 billion tonnes. So we are being taken for mugs. It's time to stand up for the British people.
Okay, hang on. Let me bring the people in.
India is being backed by renewable energy. So any changes to the amount of energy being produced in those
how
countries...
renewable is 4.8 billion tonnes of coal? 4.8 billion tonnes of coal. How renewable is that?
So the changes that they're making, so any new industries are having renewables. So that's the point, both in India and in China. Now, of course, they need to retrofit, and the industries that they already have, they need to make sure they address those too. But the growth is coming because of renewables.
How much do you think coal production has increased in China? Genuine question. How much? I genuinely interested whether you know the answer to this. How much do you think coal production has increased in China over the last 10 years?
You just told me 3 times, and I wasn't...
How many? So I told you 3 times.
Okay, well, I tell you what...
3 times how much? See, this is the point. We have political leaders who have absolutely no idea what is actually going on in the world, and they genuinely care far more about what Greta Thunberg thinks and what people at Islington dinner parties think than what you, the British people, care about, which is eye-wateringly expensive energy bills, melting in the summer, freezing in the winter, and frankly, a country that is buckling under the mad cult of net zero.
All right. So, I wanted to bring you in, but we've run out of time. So there's a lot of chat on this panel, so I apologise for that. So for now, I just want to say thank you to the panel, thank you to the audience. It's been great to have you here. Really appreciate all your contributions. For now, from Question Time, unless there's some other political cataclysm, that's it. Until the autumn. Bye-bye.